Alright, so we're going to be talking about making stamps, and so this is for our next project. We're going to be doing a slab vessel with a lid. So we're going to be making it out of these kind of flat sheets of clay, sort of like you made your foot on your coil pot. So we're going to make these flat sheets of clay, but instead of us waiting until we're done building it to decorate, you're going to decorate it with stamping. So the stamps are pretty easy to make. We're going to use some pieces of leather hard clay. So I've got some little cubes of leather hard clay that I've got cut for you and ready to go. And I'm going to have everybody make at least 5 stamps today. So first I want to show you a few basic techniques for how to make a stamp, and then show you kind of how the stamps work. But it's a really quick and easy way to do some pretty complicated decorating. And that's why I like to do this one at the end of the school year, because we're usually a little short on time, so this one kind of saves us time. But it's also a really traditional way of decorating pottery. It's been around for thousands of years. People stamping their pots to make some kind of design or decoration. Okay, so talk about some basics here. So you're going to start with just this kind of rough block. Alright, so the rough block of clay, you can see it's not perfect. I just kind of cut these up. The first thing you want to do is make sure that it's leather hard. So most of them should be just fine. It's kind of firm. So when I squeeze it, it's tough. Okay, it's going to hold your designs nice and cleanly. So what I like to do first is take my fettling knife, which is this one here, okay, the metal handle and the wooden blade fettling knife, and then I'm going to slice off one end of it nice and clean like that. And then what I also do is I rub it on the table so it's perfectly flat. So I have a surface that's got a nice flat surface. So I rub one side of it until it's perfectly flat like this. Now I could leave it like a cube or this shape, or I could cut it into a different shape. So I'm just going to cut the corners off here and make it into more of like a octagon shape or a hexagon shape. Okay, so I can cut it and make it a different shape. It doesn't have to be a square. I could even carefully shave it down and make this into a circular shape if I wanted to. So the outside is going to be part of the stamp. So I could sort of whittle it down into a circular shape and just keep taking off these edges like this. And then I could even go like this and roll it on the table and try to get it more circular. Okay, so figure out what shape you want your stamp to be first. So you can do squares, triangles, multi-sided, or something round or oval shape. You decide what size or shape the stamp should be. Okay, so there's your stamp base. Now when I go to use this, I have a couple options. If I'm going to make a stamp that is going to push into the clay and make a design that sits below the surface, what I'd have to do is carve around things and leave parts sticking up, like this one. Okay, somebody made this stamp last year. So you can see when we stamp it, the X is going to go into the clay and be below the surface. Okay, so that's an example of that kind of a stamp. The other type of a stamp is where when you stamp it, it's going to make things pop up into above the surface. So this is one where it's got these little dimples in the top. So when I press it into the clay, the dimples will be little bumps on the slab. Okay, so there's the stamps that go in and the stamps that pop out. So you can kind of decide and play around with both of those ideas as much as you want to. Okay, I'm trying to get my focus to work here. Sometimes it doesn't like that. There we go. Okay. So you've got some different ideas to think about. So the first thing I want you to try is just a simple pattern. Repeat some shapes. You can carve things out of the end of this piece of leather hard clay, or you can press things into it. When I'm making a stamp, I usually press things into it because I find it's faster and easier. So I'm going to take this screw right here and I'm going to press in at the sides, and I'm going to create this little pattern here around the ends of my stamp, like so. Okay, and then I've got these little patterns from the threads on the screw. I'm going to take my Sharpie and I'm going to press in here in the middle and make some little circular shapes. Okay, so it doesn't take long to make one like this if you just press things in. Okay, I could also carve things out. So I could take my knife and I could carve some little lines out of it like this. So I'm just carefully slicing these out. And it's kind of, you know, it's precise because you're working with a small thing here, so you got to be kind of careful. All right, so I could put some lines into it and carve those out pretty easy to make a stamp. So here's one that I'll show you. This is my potter's mark. This is what it looks like. Okay, so this is the mark that I press into my pots a lot of times. So if you ever see one of my pots in here, you might notice that it has my potter's mark in it. Okay, so if I wanted to make a stamp of my potter's mark, first I draw it, and I drew this with a Sharpie, so it's got kind of a thick line. But when I go to use it on a stamp, I have to trace it upside down, like this. So I'm going to put it on there backwards, so that when I stamp it, it's right side out. Okay, so that's a little bit confusing. But I would trace this, so I just drew this on a piece of paper, and then I'm going to take a pencil and carefully just trace it over the paper. So you could actually draw a design on paper first. Notebook paper works great because it's really thin. So you can draw it and then transfer it. And I'm doing this in reverse. Focus. Come back, focus. Okay, so now you can see it. It's backwards. All right, so now I could carve into it and create a stamp with that, and then when I stamp it, it will flip it so that it's facing the right direction. Okay, so if you have any directional designs where something has to be facing a certain way, I don't really want you to put your name in a stamp because we're going to be stamping the outside of the pot. I don't want to see your name 50 times on the outside of your pot. I mean, maybe you're a very confident person and you think you deserve that, but I would say do something that's not just your name. And I would not stamp an entire project with my potter's mark. This would just be on the bottom somewhere, just to let people know that I made it. Okay? So you're going to create these stamps. When you feel like you've got something that you like, then what you do to test it is you take your stamp and you're going to use the hair dryer. Okay? So you just dry the stamp. But you don't have to dry it until it's bone dry. You can just dry it a little bit so that it's not going to smush it. All right, so here are what happens when we go to stamp your piece of clay to try it out. Let me get this in the right place here. Autofocus is not auto all the time. Okay, so here is a piece of clay. So you have some soft clay either on your shelf in a bag still left over from the coil pot, or I will have some leftover clay on the sink that you can use for this. So you just kind of smash out a little flat piece of clay, and then I'm going to try this stamp. Okay, so this one I just made, I dried it a little bit with the hair dryer. So now I'm going to stamp it, and I always kind of wiggle it back and forth a little bit, and there's my stamp. Nice and clean, looks nice and crisp. Here's some that I made earlier today. Just has a different pattern to it. So I carved these out earlier, so these have been drying. Here's another one I made earlier. And this one you can still see. Okay, so you can kind of have fun with the stamp patterns, but you can kind of see where we're going to go with this. You'll be able to create this interesting design on your projects just by stamping these different stamps into it. So today what we're going to do is focus on just experimenting, making stamps, and let's say you make one and you don't like it. Okay, so I've made this stamp here and I don't think the stamp looks that great. Thank you, focus. Alright, so all I have to do if I don't like this stamp is take it and slice off the end like this. Get rid of that stamp, start over, try something else. Okay, so we've got plenty of these little scraps to use. You can use any of the tools you have in your kit, or you can look in the tool cabinet if you want to find something else, and just experiment, and then use your soft clay to test them out and see if they work. If they don't work when you stamp them, let's try to figure out what's going on, why it's not looking the way that you thought it would look. And if you're trying to do something really intricate and it has to face a certain direction, don't forget to flip it, and that should help you get it in the right place. Alright, the stamping clay is up on the sink in a bucket, and I will get out some soft clay so you can experiment and try out your stamps.